Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Easy English podcast. And in this episode, I want to do something a little bit different. And that is to make a very long compilation of these English topics for sleep. The idea is that you can play this video when you go to sleep at night or when you're on a long journey and listen to lots of English content to help immerse your brain with lots of English. This video will include lots of my recent videos together in one video. So you can just press play while you drive, while you're sleeping, or when you're on a long journey. So enjoy. And today we are going to talk all about podcasts, just like this one, and how they are useful for learning English. For those of you who are new, on this channel and in this series, we talk in easy, simple English for learners so you can practice your listening skills and learn new words. But let's get started. Did you know that podcasts are one of the best ways to improve your English? In this episode, I'm going to look about why podcasts are so useful, what to look for in a good podcast for English learning, and how to use them effectively. So whether you're traveling to work, relaxing, getting ready to go to bed, exercising, you can practice English absolutely anywhere with this podcast. Let's dive in and get started. So why should you use podcasts to learn English? The number one reason is that you can hear real life English. Podcasts help you hear how people really speak. They use everyday language, natural tones or ways of speaking, and different accents as well. And this is great for learning and improving your listening skills. Take, for example, this podcast. I am a native English speaker. And when I speak, you can practice listening to maybe a different accent, but also real English speech. And just a little warning. You need to be very careful with the English podcasts that you listen to, especially in 2024, because there are so many AI podcasts. So podcasts made with artificial intelligence. I see them every day now in this category, in this space, and so many of them use artificial voices, not real native speaker voices. And this is a terrible way to learn. Not only are you going to pick up incorrect ways of pronunciation, but also you're not practicing listening to real speech. So do be careful, keep an eye out for these AI voices and these AI podcasts, and don't waste your time listening to them. There are so many channels out there with real English speech, because even from the way or style of speaking, if you listen to me, sometimes I pause, I go I stop. This is natural. It is a natural rhythm of speech. Robots don't do that. They speak in a way that is unnatural. They don't go, there's no filler words. They speak in a strange way. So just my warning before we continue. The second point of why podcasts are very useful for learning English is convenience. You can listen to them anytime, anywhere. On the bus, maybe while you're driving, while you're cleaning. That's one of my favorite things to do. I listen to podcasts while I am doing a chore. A chore is maybe a household activity like cleaning the dishes, cleaning the house, that type of thing. You can also listen to podcasts when you're going for a walk, really any time. And that's what makes it such a useful way to practice English. The third point is there are podcasts on everything. When I make this podcast, for example, I like to choose lots of different topics to interest everyone. So about the environment, about maybe history, about even traveling, so many different topics. Okay, so the fourth main point is listening and understanding. So regular listening of podcasts will improve your ability to understand spoken English, including new vocabulary, slang, and even sometimes idioms. Okay, so next I want to tell you a little bit about how to use this podcast effectively. So what are some ways that you can listen to this episode and use it to improve your English, just as an example. So the first point is active listening. Don't just listen passively. Pay attention to how words are pronounced and how sentences are formed. Of course, if you want to just listen passively, so in the background, that is fine too. And it also helps your brain to pick up new phrases, improve your understanding, etc., etc. But active listening is a great way to start. So just pay attention to what is being said, maybe some of the grammar and things like that. The second point is you can repeat and shadow me. So listen to a short section, pause the video or the audio, and then you can try to repeat what I said. And that's called shadowing. And this will help to improve both your pronunciation and also your fluency. Okay, so the third point is to listen multiple times. And this is probably one of the most important. I always recommend listening to the same episode twice. And that's because the first time you are focusing a lot more, maybe to understand phrases, words, the topic, and the second listen through, you will understand things so much better. Also, the first time you should use subtitles. Read the transcript while you're listening, the words on the screen. And then the second time, just listen and don't read. And that will help to train your listening skills without any subtitles. And really, one of the most important points is to make it a routine. So try to listen to this podcast regularly. I make an episode, every few days, sometimes every day on YouTube. And just try to do that little bit. The reason why I make these podcast episodes only 10 minutes is because I understand that it's more important for you to learn a little bit every day than a lot once per week. So listening to this 10 minutes episode per day is going to be so helpful for you. And of course, there are lots of episodes uploaded, and if you want to listen to more on one day, you can. So really, I think podcasts are an amazing tool to help you learn English. I honestly think they're probably the best way to practice online without, a teacher, for example, possibly the best content that you can be consuming for English language learning, particularly if you're, beginner to intermediate levels. It's a great way. And that's why I do this. I think that people have very busy lives, and podcasts are a great way of doing things alongside other areas of your life. So remember, make listening to podcasts a habit, and with time, you will see real improvements to your speaking, your listening, and your understanding skills. And of course, that is probably one of the most important bits of language learning, understanding. So thank you so much for listening to the Easy English podcast. If you're new, please subscribe. If you're not, like the video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Today we are talking about a skill that's super useful but not always easy. How to argue in English. So I'm Oliver, and let's see today how we can better argue and deliver our point in English. Now, I'm not talking about fighting or yelling, for example, shouting at someone. I mean having a discussion, sharing your opinion, and handling or dealing with disagreements calmly and clearly. Does this sound interesting? Let's go. So why is it important to know how you can properly argue and get your point across, we would say, in English? Well, it's not just about winning an argument. Sometimes you just need to be able to explain your point of view, your opinion, or even maybe you just need to try to solve a small disagreement with a friend or a co-worker. Knowing the correct or the right words can make a big difference. And don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. Okay, so the first tip before we actually learn some phrases is to stay calm. Especially now that you're speaking in English, you want to stay calm and appear confident. The second is, of course, to listen first. A good argument is really not about talking. It's about listening to what the other person is saying and then figuring out how to explain your point of view properly too. The third tip, of course, be polite and respectful. And we'll look at some phrases now which will help you to do all three of these. So sometimes I get people asking me, how do I better say this phrase? And often when we talk about our opinion, we will use the phrase I think. But there are so many other ways to say this. So, of course, to share your opinion, you can say I think. But you can also say, in my opinion, or one that I like is from my perspective. From my perspective. I think that is a nice, soft way to express what you think. And it sounds a bit more advanced than I think. As well as from my perspective, you can also say from my point of view. And that just means, in my opinion as well. You're sharing your opinion. But what if you want to maybe express that you don't agree? Well, a good way, instead of saying, that's wrong, or, you're not right, a nicer way to express that would be, for example, I understand your point, but, and then say what you think. So you're telling that person that you have heard what they say, and you're listening to what they say, and then you tell them what you think. Another way to say this would be, I see where you're coming from, but I feel that, and then give your point. Or if you want to disagree politely but more directly, you can say, I'm not sure I agree with that. So it's giving that direct approach of saying you don't really agree. And what phrases can we use if we agree with someone a little bit? So maybe we agree with what they've said, but don't think that it's entirely correct. We can say, that's a good point, but... Or we could say, I agree with you to some extent. However, and then we say our point. So those are just a few phrases that you can use to agree or disagree. And sometimes if you can't come to an agreement and you both disagree, which happens a lot of times in arguments, you can say this phrase, let's agree to disagree. It means, yeah, we both think differently and that's okay. And we will both probably still think differently. And at least you've expressed what you think and the other person knows. Okay, so now that you know some phrases, how do I recommend practicing arguing or arguments? Well, often when I'm talking about an argument here, I mean a debate. So when there are two different sets of ideas. And one of the best ways to practice is to watch debates or even interviews in English. And this will show you how people share their opinions and disagree with each other without being very rude or maybe abrupt. You can also, of course, practice with friends or family, maybe someone else who is studying English. And to do so, you can pick a fun topic, something not too serious. Like, for example, which is better, Android or iPhone? Or what do you like more, Coca-Cola or Pepsi? Topics like that, which are not so serious, but make for a good practice. Practice makes perfect. And I'm sure that you will develop the skill to argue effectively in English the more you do it. Okay, so you might be wondering, how can I structure my argument? Now that you've got some phrases and tips, when we build an argument, we can use the PREP method in English. And this is an acronym. An acronym is a word where each letter stands for another word. So PREP, it stands for point, reason, example, and point. And this is something that you can use for making your arguments. So the point is the claim. That means what you think, the argument. You want to say your main point and what you think. For example, I think pizza is the best food. Then the second part is the reason. So prep, point, reason. And that is why you think it. So you can say, because I think that pizza is the tastiest food in the world. And then you want to give an example. So prep, point, reason, examples. So you'll give one or more example to support your main point and the reasons. For example, maybe you could say that in a study, 60% of people said that pizza was the tastiest food in the world. And then finally, the last part of the process is a point again. So you want to conclude and show how your examples and reasons prove that initial point. You're really re-saying that first point to help the other person remember it now that they know the evidence, the reasons, and the examples. So hopefully that helps you with building an argument, and some of those phrases before can also help you to practice and build sentences. But of course, we get better from practicing in real life. And it's good to do some of these role plays or scenarios if you have a study partner, or even do them in your head. Make arguments in your mind and practice that way. It can be useful too. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Easy English podcast. Like the video if you enjoyed, and remember to subscribe if you're new. And don't forget to check out one of our many other episodes. Have a lovely day and goodbye. Did you know there's a shopping day so big that people sleep outside of stores? They battle and fight each other for bargains, and they destroy websites all across the internet. Let's talk about Black Friday. I'm Oliver, and welcome back to the Easy English podcast. And today we are talking about one of the craziest shopping holidays in the world, and that is Black Friday. This may sound strange to some of you. Black Friday, have you heard of it? It is one of the biggest shopping days of the year in places like the United States, the UK, and many other parts of the world. But why is it so popular? And is it as crazy as people say? Let's find out. Firstly, let's talk about what is Black Friday. Black Friday happens every year on the day after the American holiday of Thanksgiving, and that is celebrated on the fourth Thursday in November. Black Friday is not a holiday necessarily, but it's a day when shops and online stores offer huge discounts. A discount is when they reduce the price. They make the price lower. The name Black Friday comes from the idea that businesses make a lot of money on this day, and that puts their financial figures from red, which is a loss, so losing money, to black, which is profit. So, what actually happens on Black Friday? Usually what happens is shops and online stores advertise massive sales on products like electronics, clothing, and home goods. And some people even wait all year to buy expensive items like TVs or computers at much lower prices than the rest of the year. I've even seen on TV and some videos, some shoppers, so people who are buying things, getting up very, very early in the morning and waiting outside stores still during the night time until they opened. Some people, for some stores, even slept outside the store. They camped outside the store all night. How crazy is that? But sometimes Black Friday can get a little bit wild. There have been stories of people pushing and arguing with each other to get the last discounted item in a store. And even then there were fights. So people were seriously injured or hurt trying to get these discounted items. If you're enjoying this video and episode, like the video and subscribe. Okay, these days a lot of Black Friday shopping happens online, and that has made it a little bit calmer. But it's still so very busy, with millions of online shoppers all at once. Thousands and millions and billions, maybe not billions, but millions of people going online to try and get deals at the same time. And as you can imagine, some of the websites have problems because so many people are trying to use the same website at the same time. So why is this crazy day so popular? It is popular because, in my opinion, because it is so close to Christmas. In countries like the UK and the US, Christmas is a popular time for giving gifts to family and friends. And Black Friday is a great chance to buy presents for these people at lower prices. And some people even use that time to maybe buy themselves a little something special that they have wanted for a very long time. And I think that's quite nice. And of course, with a lot of things, or like a lot of things that started as very popular in the United States, they have began to become more popular around the world. And I think that Black Friday is in some way everywhere, particularly with big online brands such as Amazon, which offer their sort of online Black Friday event all around the world. The crazy thing is that Black Friday over time has grown and grown as an event. It used to just be one day, and then it became Black Friday weekend, and now it's basically Black Friday week, and there's even something called Cyber Monday, which is like another Black Friday, but only online, with online shopping. So how long will this holiday grow for? Is it going to be Black Friday month soon and Black Friday year? I don't know. But the holiday has grown, and as a result, it probably has become less crazy because there's more time to try and get products. People aren't stressing to try and get the deals in one day. And maybe that's a good thing. So should you join in? If you're interested in Black Friday, it can be a great opportunity or chance to buy some things that you need at lower prices. But do remember to plan ahead I find that sometimes I notice that items on Black Friday are actually the same price or even more expensive than they are at other times of the year. I've noticed that often companies will actually increase the price of products ahead of Black Friday, maybe 1 month before, and then they discount the products again on Black Friday. That's kind of crazy, and it makes people think that there is a big sale or discount. So, not so good. Of course, it's very important to budget. So to plan for how much money you will spend. With crazy deals, people can get a little bit carried away. That means they can go a little bit crazy and not think too much. So having a budget, a plan for your spending will help control it around that crazy day. Okay, let's review some new words and phrases that we have maybe heard this episode. The first is discount. A discount is a reduction in price, making the price lower or less. For example, this laptop is 50% off, so 50% lower price. It's a huge discount. The second is to camp overnight. So I said about people camping overnight. So that means to stay outside, usually in a tent, waiting for an event or something to happen. Okay, the next word is profit. Profit is money that a business makes after it pays its costs. And finally, the word we just learned is budget. To budget is to plan for how much money you will spend. Okay, so let me know in the comments below, or if you're on Spotify, you can answer the poll. Do you celebrate? Well, maybe not celebrate, but do you take part in Black Friday? Is the holiday or the day a thing in your country? Let me know. I'm very curious. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a fantastic day. I appreciate each and every one of you for supporting this channel and this podcast. You're all so great and you mean a lot to me. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And as always, we will be speaking with clear and easy English for learners. Today, we are going to be exploring an interesting topic, learning English like a baby. You've probably heard people say that babies learn languages naturally. Maybe you have noticed it, so you've seen children pick up second languages, so learn second languages very quickly. But what does that mean for adults and teenagers learning English? Can we learn in the same way that children or babies do? In this episode, we are going to discuss and look at this method, why it might work, and how you can possibly use some baby-like learning techniques to help improve your English. Let's get started. And as always, if you like this type of episode, like the video. Okay, so to start, when we say learn like a baby, we mean learning a language naturally, without focusing too much on grammar rules or textbooks. After all, when we think about it, babies don't study. They learn by listening, by imitating, so copying, and practicing. They also don't worry about making mistakes. Babies just speak once they start. So this method focuses on the following steps. The first and most important method, which is so underrated, that is listening first. When we think of the baby again, babies listen to people around them for months and months before they say their first words. They absorb the sounds, tones, and patterns of the language. And then, usually, what they start to do is they imitate the sounds. That means they copy the sounds. So babies copy what they hear. They repeat words and phrases even if they don't understand everything at first. This is a key point. So when you think of a child learning, they don't understand everything that they hear, but they start to copy it. Their brains are getting used to the sounds and they are practicing those sounds. And this is so important for learning a language. The next point is contextual learning. So that means to learn from context. Babies, again on the example of babies, they learn by connecting words to actions or objects. For example, when a baby or a child hears the word milk, when they see or drink milk. And eventually their brain works out, oh, this is milk, that is milk. It is why I heard the word milk. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so now that we kind of understand the basic idea of how babies learn English and languages in general, can adults learn like this? So how can adults learn like this? And to be honest, can they really? So let's have a look. The first point, and I talk about this all the time, is immersion. So adults, of course, we can immerse yourself in English. Surround yourself with English as much as possible. Listen to podcasts like this, watch TV shows, and try to hear English every day. And even if you don't understand everything at first, your brain is absorbing. So it's taking in the language and you're hearing it. Next point is we can, of course, imitate or copy what we hear. We can hear new words or phrases, we can repeat and copy them out loud. And don't worry too much about your pronunciation, just try. Shadowing is what this is called, and it's a great way to practice. Okay, so the next point is about the context. So I mentioned that babies learn words from context. And if you can take anything from this episode, maybe a point or a learning point, let it be this. I think for adults, this is an underrated, underused method, learning from context. So when you learn a word, make sure to learn it in context. Take a look at examples of that word being used and learn the sentence. Don't just learn the word. And by connecting that word with other things that you know, you can really, really learn well. So be patient. When we look at babies, they take time to speak fluently as well. Don't get frustrated if it feels slow. Of course, babies are different because they have all the time in the world to just develop and absorb language. As adults and maybe teenagers, it can be a lot harder to do this because we have such busy lives with so much stuff going on. So the question you might have been waiting for, does it really work? Can we learn just like a baby? And my answer is yes and no. And why have I answered that way? I say yes because this method of input works. So learning like a baby does work because it's natural. It focuses on communication, not perfection. And this method in general helps to improve your listening, to get you speaking as well, and to gain confidence over time. But why I also say it doesn't always work, and that's because for most of us, we need some kind of structure. Of course, just consuming as much English as possible is great, and repeating it or practicing is also great, but most of us also, particularly adults, need a structure around their learning. Understanding why they do something. For example, basic grammar, maybe an environment with a teacher to give feedback and help us improve. But everyone is different. But in general, this method of learning like a baby is something that we should all apply to our study routine. Plenty of input, listening and English input, and plenty of output. So practicing, trying to speak, trying to imitate and copy. This is great, and we all need to do much more of this. And actually, we can take some more tips from babies as well. And that is, stay curious. Babies ask lots of questions. They are trying to learn about as much as they can. New words, what something means, what it is. And we should take the same approach with English. Be curious, learn like a baby, practice every day, and ask lots of questions. It's a really healthy way to learn English. So, to conclude, learning English like a baby is a fun, natural way to build your skills. And in a way, I think we all do it to an extent, even as adults. But we should try to really focus on these key skills. Listening, copying and repeating, and also learning from context, because they are so helpful. And most importantly, you need to enjoy the journey. Language learning does not have to be stressful at all. It can be exciting and really rewarding. Thank you so much for listening to the Easy English podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and share it with friends or colleagues who are learning English. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye. And today we are going to be talking about a very important part of language learning, and that is motivation and persistence. So what is persistence? Persistence is when you keep doing something, you continue to do something, and you don't give up. You don't quit it. This is something which will affect every single one of you when it comes to learning English. The motivation to keep learning, the reasons for why you learn and what makes you study it every single day or every week. We all know that learning a language consistently, so regularly, like every day or every week, having a routine is key for success. After all, we need to learn and practice to get better. For some of us, this could be a class. This could be listening to this podcast every episode. It could be doing a self-study course or learning vocabulary every day. For others, it can be easier. Maybe you live in the country which speaks your language, or the language that you want to learn. For example, an English-speaking country, or a country where lots of people speak English. And in this case, you are speaking English every day, which is great practice. But for most of us, we don't have that privilege, so we don't have that benefit. We have to motivate ourselves every day to try to study and practice. Motivation is the driving force behind language learning. So it is what pushes us forward. It is what makes us improve. Whether you are learning for personal, academic, or professional reasons, having a strong motivation fuels your commitment and determination to succeed. The best thing to do is to reflect and think about your reasons for learning a language and to set clear goals for the future, which will help keep your motivation very high. So before we can keep ourselves motivated, it is better to understand what are the types of motivation. There are two main categories or types of motivation. These words might be a little bit hard or difficult, but I will explain. So the two main forms can be intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is motivation from internal factors, so from things inside of you. This can be an example, for example, a genuine interest in the language or a desire to improve yourself. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, comes from external sources or rewards or incentives. So that can be, for example, passing an exam or impressing other people. And it is good to use both motivation factors to keep on track. But I will be honest with you, in my experience with language learning, with teaching students, motivation is never enough. Motivation will not teach you a language. Motivation will not make you good at English. And the reason for that is our motivation is not consistent. It is not always the same. To learn a language and to improve and get better, we need routine. We need habits, strong habits. And the only way to do that is by putting in the work and creating a healthy language learning habit and routine. Some days you will feel more motivated than others. You might notice progress or feel very good about yourself, and it will make you want to learn. Other days you might be tired. Maybe you had a bad night's sleep, or a problem in your family or personal life. We can't control so many of these things. And if we rely on our natural motivation, we will always have problems. However, even with all of this talk about routine and habits, motivation is still important as a foundation. What I mean by that is we need to know why we are doing something. For example, think about, why are you learning English? It can be for so many different reasons. Are you learning English to get a better job, to move to another country, to increase the ability to talk to people from around the world? Or maybe you just want to watch English movies or read English books in the original format. All of these are amazing motivations, and it's important to know why you are doing something. And when things get tough or difficult and you're finding your motivation low, it's good to remember why you're doing something and why you're working on it. What I'd like you to do is, if you're watching or listening on YouTube, comment below what motivates you to learn English. Like, why are you learning English? What are the reasons? And if you're watching on Spotify, you can answer in the question as well on the Spotify episode. So I would really love to hear your answers. So once we know the reasons why we are learning English, we then need to create a healthy habit and routine. This is different for everyone. Maybe you want to do a little bit of English every single day. Then your habit might be to learn some new vocabulary every day, maybe to read or listen to something in English every single day, or maybe every day is too much and you would rather 2 or 3 times a week do this, or once per week. Whatever works for you is great. Everyone has a different schedule. There is no one correct routine for each person. But the most important thing is to build a routine. And that means that when you feel tired or maybe less motivated on a day to learn English, it is your routine, like eating your breakfast or brushing your teeth. You will do it. And this doesn't have to be all of your learning. It's good for not all of your learning to be routine or habit, but what this does is it gives you a good base level of learning, so a basic level of learning in your week. And all the extra bits that you might do, that can come from your motivation. So when you feel extra energetic on a day, maybe you want to watch an extra movie in English or do some extra learning, and that's great. But this changes every day. And even on the days and the weeks that you don't feel like that, you will still have your base level of English learning and that routine which you have established, which you have built over the previous weeks. These habits and routines can take about, I would say, a couple of months to build. So some people say it takes 10 weeks to build a habit. For each person, I would say it's a little bit different, but just try to build your habit and routine as best you can. I believe each and every one of you can make great progress with English. So don't rely or don't depend on your motivation. You need to make your own progress, your own structure. You are your own person as a learner. You don't rely or need motivation to do this all the time. So thank you for listening. I hope this was a useful episode. Remember to comment down below what your motivations are for learning English. Why do you learn English? And I will see you in the next episode of the podcast. Goodbye and have a lovely day. Today we are talking about transport. So we will look at the different types of transport, the positives and negatives of each modes or types of transport, and which is most common in the UK and maybe different areas around the world. This topic is so important because we use transport every day. Well, most of us use transport every day. And it can be many different types. Even a bicycle is a mode of transport. So a mode of transport is a type of transport. How we move from one place to another. So we might say a bicycle is a type of transport or a mode of transport. A car, even by foot, we are transporting ourselves when we walk. So a lot of people have different favorite types of transport. For example, some people love trains. Some people love flying. They love the experience of flying. And today we will talk about some of the main things. And let's start with bicycles. So, bicycles, or as we call them in the UK sometimes, bikes. So bikes are quite a green method of transport, and they are very good exercise. A lot of people love bicycles when they use them for shorter journeys in areas where it's easy to travel by bicycle. Of course, some countries are better for this than others. Let's take, for example, the Netherlands, or as some people call it, Holland. So I just checked and I read online that in the Netherlands, there are 23.9 million bicycles in the country. And if we compare that to the population, there are 17.6 million people that live there, which means there is an average of 1.4 bikes or bicycles per person in the country. So, bicycles are a very important mode of transport in the Netherlands. If any of you are from the Netherlands, I would like to hear why bicycles are so popular. If I had to guess, I would say it is because it's quite a small country, quite a flat country, so not a lot of hills or mountains, and the climate, so the weather is quite good for cycling. But that is just my guess. I could be very, very wrong. Of course, bicycles are not great in every country. In some countries, the infrastructure, so the facilities that we have, like roads and footpaths, are not designed for bicycles. They are designed for cars, maybe there's trains and other methods, but it's quite hostile or not nice for bicycles. And I would say the UK is like that in a lot of areas. Some parts of the UK have a lot of bicycle lanes and are quite nice to cycle around. For example, Edinburgh in Scotland is a city that has a lot of cyclists. Even London is a little bit better for bicycles than other parts of the UK. And even looking at America, so at the USA, it is a horrible country to cycle in unless you go to a park or a designated cycle area. They don't have the same culture of people cycling in the road or in the streets as we do have in Europe. So one of the best parts of bicycles is that it is healthy. It is exercise. It gets us moving, and not only does it help us get to the location, but it has lots of benefits for our health. Another negative can be that it is slow. It's not as fast as driving a car when there's no traffic, but it is a slower method of transport in general. So, next, cars. What do you think about cars? I drive every day. Sometimes I drive too much for work, very long distances, and I must say I used to hate driving. It annoyed me so much, and I hated traffic, I hated motorways. I found the whole process not comfortable, boring, and it just annoyed me. But the more I have driven, it has become a habit, a routine, and I don't mind it so much now. I try to listen to podcasts and audiobooks, but anyway, let's look at some of the positives and negatives of driving of cars. So one of the positives is that you can use it anytime. You can go and get in your car, just like a bicycle, I guess. Whereas when we use public transport, so a train or a bus, it has a set schedule, a set routine. Certain times that you have to get it. Maybe every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes. It depends if you live in a city or maybe in the countryside. There are a lot less buses and trains. But the beauty of a car is you can go to your driveway, get in the car and just go. Another beauty is that you have, or another benefit is that you have privacy. So there are not other people around that you don't know. You can sing if you want to. You can listen to music out loud. You can listen to a podcast. You don't have to worry about people around you and about disturbing or annoying other people. And that is a big benefit. You have your own personal space. And another benefit could be speed. Cars can be quite fast, and sometimes driving on motorways is efficient, and you can get to locations nearby very comfortably. You can drive direct to where you want to go. You don't have to get off at a stop or a certain place and then walk to the location. Okay, so now some negatives of cars. And I would say the number one for me is traffic. So when it's busy and there are lots of cars and they don't move very much, and one car is stuck behind the other car, so slow to get to a location. This is so frustrating and annoying. Well, this is only the start of the negatives for me. The second negative of cars is that unless it is a green car, so maybe an electric car, which uses good energy, green energy, then cars are bad for the air quality. So they affect the air that we breathe in our cities and towns because of the CO2 that they emit. Another negative of cars can be a big one: cost. They're quite expensive to run. So not only do you need to buy a car or rent a car, you need to pay for insurance, fuel, maybe repairs, servicing, all of this stuff every year. And it's quite an expensive type of transport. What do you think? What is your favorite type of transport? So, another type of transport, and the last one we will talk about today, because if I talk about trains, planes, everything, we could be here all day. So the next type I will talk about is aeroplanes. So flying. Aeroplanes are a fast method of transport in some way, and I want to make a separate episode of this podcast about flying, so about airports and the whole process of flying, because it's something I unfortunately do a lot with my job, and I hate airports. I don't like them. I don't like the process. But flying itself is fast. Once you're in the air, you can travel from country to country, location to location, much faster than you could do by train or car. But the extra time in airports and security and waiting makes that journey so much longer, especially for shorter distances, which is definitely a negative. Another negative is that it is terrible for the environment, really bad for the environment. And unless you're in business class or upper class, first class they call it, sometimes it isn't so comfortable. You can have crying babies, some noisy people, not much room for your legs, among other things. But one benefit I think of flying is it's quite cool. It's nice to be high in the sky, able to look around at the clouds and the small land below you. It's nice. I like it. And I do enjoy flying from time to time. Of course, some honourable mentions to other types of transport would include trains. So trains can be a great way to travel. Lots of people can travel on one train, and it's good for short to medium distances, in my opinion. It's quite a comfortable way to travel. However, especially here in the UK, we have lots of problems with trains, cancellations, delays. A delay is when something is late. It isn't on time, so the time it's meant to be. And this makes trains not such a fun way to travel in the UK. And they are also so expensive. Almost most of the time more expensive than flying. So I fly to England for work, and I live in Northern Ireland. And some people who travel to the same place that I fly to from other parts of England pay more for their train tickets than I pay for flights. Sometimes twice more, 2 times more expensive to travel a smaller distance by train. That is crazy to me. Anyway, let me know what trains are like in your country. And if you're watching or listening on Spotify, answer the question what your favorite type of transport is. And if you're watching this or listening to this on YouTube, please leave a comment below and tell me what your favorite type of transport is. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in the next episode of Understandable English. Goodbye. Today we are going to be answering the very important question: does it always rain in the UK? Is the weather always so bad like people say it is? Maybe in movies you see all the time it is cloudy, grey, rainy, and the weather is terrible. So today I want to talk about that and answer the question once and for all. We are going to look at some statistics, some facts about how much it actually rains in the UK, and I will give you my own experience too. So I hope you enjoy. To start with, one of the most common opening lines in a British conversation is, "Oh, what's the weather going to be like later or tomorrow?" Or a comment about the weather, saying, "The weather's great, it's horrible, it's rainy, it's lovely." And why is that? It's simply because here in the UK, the climate is varied. So it is very different all the time. And it's very unpredictable. It's so hard to tell what the weather is going to be like tomorrow or in the evening. And it can change drastically, so very fast, from one extreme to the next, from day to day and between different regions, even though it is a very small island, or a quite small island. But the plus side of this is, no matter what weather you prefer, if you don't like it one day, there is a very, very good chance that you will have completely different weather the next day. And I can tell you straight away that so despite popular belief, so what people think, it doesn't rain every day here in the UK. And I'll explain a little bit more later why that is and how it actually is like. So let's take a look at how British weather changes from season to season and from region, so area to area. In the UK, we do experience all 4 seasons. So with spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and the weather does change in all of these seasons, but it isn't as extreme as other countries. For example, we do have seasons which blend together at the end and the beginning, where it's quite hard to tell, for example, if it's the end of spring or the start of summer. The weather is pretty much the same. So that means as well, we have quite an unexpected or unpredictable weather pattern in seasons. It isn't the same every year. So that means that sometimes we get a warm or bright sunny day in February, or we can get a cold day with freezing rain in the middle of summer. So always expect anything when you come to the UK. Naturally, winter is the coldest month in the UK, with temperatures often dropping below 0 degrees Celsius. But to be honest, it's quite rare when we get temperatures during the daytime at -4 or -5, or even -2 or -3. Most of the time in winter, the weather sits at around a comfortable anywhere in between 0 and maybe 5-6 degrees. But what is bad about the British winter isn't the cold, because it isn't very cold. I mean, there are some days in winter we have had +10 or +8, +9 for weeks. The bad part is the windy and wet weather. I can't speak. Weather. Especially for those who live in the northern, so the north or the west parts of the UK. And that means you have awful wind and rain. And the wind can blow the rain, so the wetness, into your face. And it's not very nice. So now we move towards spring. So March, April, and May. The temperatures begin to rise and the sun that we've all been waiting on begins to start. Spring in the UK is known for its beautiful flowers coming to life right across the country. Although it's not so cold like winter, it's not quite the time for putting on your shorts and t-shirts and wearing sunglasses. Sometimes we're quite lucky and we can have quite a calm, dry period of time. But a lot of the time, spring can be quite wet and windy. It can be as cold as +3 degrees in March, or even as hot as +30 degrees in May in some areas of the UK. So you can see what I mean about the weather being quite unpredictable each year. And now for summer, so June, July, and August. British people love summer. It's the one time in the year where we usually get warmer temperatures and less rain. I say usually because sometimes we can get a pretty bad summer. It's different every year. So in some areas of the UK, the temperatures reach up to +32 degrees in the summer, and that's pretty hot. The average summer temperature in London is around +21 when it's a good year. So it's quite high for us in the UK for an average temperature. July is usually the warmest month of the year, but June is the sunniest. And the total amount of rainy days changes year to year. Sometimes we have just a few days of rain, and other years we have weeks of showers and rain. So it's very hard to know what it's going to be like each year. But sometimes we get what we call an anticyclone or a heat wave, and this gives us a long period of hot weather. And last year we had one in the UK, and even in some areas of London, they experienced +40 degrees, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, for a country that is so green and wet and has lots of plants and trees. Okay, and our final season, autumn. So September, October, November. Usually we start to see the leaves turning golden and the nights getting shorter. It's a sign that things are moving from summer to winter. This is the season that has the biggest change in weather conditions. It is so unpredictable. It can sometimes be quite summery, so feel like summer, but at other times it can very quickly get cold. Sometimes we get snow, sometimes we don't. It's different every year. In autumn, the average autumn temperature is around plus 16 degrees, which drops to around plus 10 in November. So you'll still need to make sure you bring plenty of warm clothes. So now to our very important question. And I've waited until the end of the podcast to answer it completely. And that is, does it always rain in the UK? And it's better asked as, how much does it rain in the UK? And I can tell you that according to the UK Met Office, so the people who study the weather, there is on average 106.5 days of rain a year in London. And this even includes small amounts of rain, quite small amounts. So that means that 71% of the days in a year in London have no rain on average. So there you go. Most of the time in London and the south of England, it doesn't rain. But of course, the UK is more than London. The north and the west does have a lot more rain. With Scotland, for example, having an average in parts other than the mountains, so the highlands, of 175 days per year, which is a lot more than London. But if we compare that even with Belfast, which is my home city, it is right beside the sea, and it gets 194 days of rain a year, which is a lot. So you can see that it isn't so simple. Some parts it rains more than others, but the rain often only lasts for a very short time. Although that says in Belfast, for example, 194 days, it can be a day where it rains for 10 minutes or 30 minutes and then it stops. And an hour later, the sun comes out and it's a beautiful day. The weather changes so fast here. And if you come to visit the UK, make sure that you're prepared for every type of weather, except for extremely cold weather. Our climate is very moderate, so it's not very hot and it's not very cold. But always be prepared for wind and rain, because that's something which will probably never change. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and have a wonderful day and rest of the week. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye. Today we will be talking about things that you should know when you travel to the UK for the first time. Today's episode of the podcast is going to be a little bit different. I've decided to pick and read an article about 15 points that you should know when you travel to the UK for the first time. What I'm going to do is look at the titles of these points and some of the information and decide whether I think it's true or not, and also talk about my own experience. I probably won't talk about all 15 because I don't think they're all very useful, but anyway, let's get started. Okay, so the first point is don't push in or invade personal space. So the writer of this article explains it as how in the UK we have mastered the art of queuing patiently and we expect everyone to follow the rules. So you should join the back of the line and wait. And I guess the second point, or the second part of this point, is that people like their personal space. So in public, they don't like when people get too close to them, like almost touching them. They really value personal space and personal boundaries. In general, I would say this is very true, especially with queuing. In general, people get very angry or a little bit upset whenever people cut in front of them in the queue. So if they try to get into a queue somewhere further up. Of course, it's like that in most countries, but I think the expectation is very high in the UK that people sort of obey that personal space, the queuing system, and we always joke about how we make queues for almost everything. So if people are waiting for things, it's almost guaranteed they will form an orderly queue. The second point is don't underestimate the English love of tea and tea breaks. This is entirely true. 100%. I have never been in a country that seems to drink as much tea as growing up with my family, for example. My parents during the day would drink, 5 or 6 cups of tea, like right through to the evening time. And I notice it absolutely everywhere I go. It's just constant tea offers and cups of tea. But the one thing I would say which separates the UK from lots of other countries is that in general, most people only drink black tea with milk. So they don't drink a lot of fancy types of tea. I even call it fancy types of tea, but in reality, of course, there are many types of tea. But they don't drink a lot of tea with fruit flavors, for example. Pretty much everyone is quite boring when it comes to tea. And the main differences will be whether they have sugar, or do they take a lot of milk, a little milk, or in rare cases, no milk. Okay, so I skipped the third point because it was kind of boring. And the fourth point that the author gives us is to understand the difference between the UK and Great Britain and England. So this is very important if you visit the UK, and I think it's something which most people outside of the EU, I would say, don't know a lot about. Especially living here in Russia, it's not a problem because I don't really care too much, but it's something where people will always confuse the UK and Great Britain, for example. In Russia, people in general just say Велика Британия, which is Great Britain, or Anglia, which is England, to refer to the whole UK, so the country or union of the United Kingdom. But in reality, it's important to know that the UK is basically a political union between 4 countries or nations. And the 2 separate unions within the UK is Great Britain and then the United Kingdom, which includes Northern Ireland. So Great Britain is Scotland and Wales and England. And the United Kingdom is Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland. And that's the officially recognised nation or country with all of these smaller nations together. I know it sounds complicated, but in short, the UK is 4 smaller nations or countries joined together politically and were called the UK. So the UK is not England, the UK is also not Great Britain. But in general, it's not even always a big problem in the UK. It can be confusing in terms of how people even refer to their own identity. So, for example, often the British Olympics team will be called Team GB. So, Team GB is officially, the official team of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's a very long name, so people just say Team GB. But it is the team for the UK, so it gets a bit confusing. In terms of nationalities, if you're from the UK, you are British. Whether that's from, it's a bit more complicated in Northern Ireland, but whether that's from Scotland, Wales, or England, on your passport, it will say British. But people have their own cultural identity and nationality within each country as well. So someone from Northern Ireland might say that they are Irish or Northern Irish. From Scotland, they are also Scottish. From Wales, they are Welsh. And finally, from England, they are English. So the most important thing, and usually people get quite offended by it, is don't call Irish people or Scottish people or Welsh people English. They will often not like to hear that, because although they are British, they are not English. They aren't from England. Okay, so I talked about that one for quite a while because I think it's a very common point which people make mistakes with. But the next point in this article by this author is don't just stay in London. And I have to completely agree with this point. So a lot of people on trips just visit London, but there are so many other wonderful places to even visit in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. Very beautiful nature, very different cities, amazing coastlines, beaches, mountains. The UK really has a very diverse landscape across it. And for example, Scotland is very different from the south of England. For such a small country, there is a lot of diversity in what you can see. So definitely don't just stay in London. It is a very fascinating city. It's an amazing city, but you have to travel outside and see some of the rest of the UK. I guess the real UK outside of just London. Okay, so one of the final points for today's podcast is the author has written, be prepared to talk about the weather a lot. She says the English are pretty obsessed with the weather and they'll talk about it all the time. If temperatures rise above 16 degrees, expect to see people in t-shirts and shorts. And above 23 degrees, it's a heat wave. And people will tell you 1,000,000 times a day that it's too hot. She also goes on to say that be prepared for the weather to change rapidly. And this is so true. I think because the UK is an island, the weather is very, very changeable. So it says here in this article, sunshine 1 minute and snow and wind the next. And that is just in summer. Often we have a phrase in the UK which is quite funny, and it is that summer is the best day of the year. So what that means is we have like 1 day of summer. But in general, in the UK, you don't want to go anywhere without a coat. So even if the weather's nice in the morning, there might be rain in the afternoon or the evening, or even 20 minutes from then. The skies change so quickly because of the wind, and because it is an island or a set of islands, so you have to always be prepared for any weather changes. And on the first part of it, yes, people talk about the weather a lot. And in general, I think this comes as an icebreaker. So, a way of making sort of easy, non awkward conversation to avoid silence. And I don't mind it, to be honest. I realize that I do it too. I sort of talk about the weather quite a bit, but it is something to be prepared for, especially if the weather changes a lot. Okay, and the final point for today's podcast, which is one I actually agree with, is the author has said, don't talk about money in the UK. So she says Brits or British people aren't particularly comfortable talking about money. It can seem quite arrogant and show-offy if you share how much you earn or how much you have spent, for example. And I would completely agree with this point. In British culture and in the UK, it is considered very rude to ask someone how much they earn, for example. So how much money they make. I would not even know growing up, for example, how much money my parents make. Not even roughly, really. Or now, how much my friends earn or the people around me. It's something we don't talk about. And I think the reason about it, or the reason for it, comes from the big divide in wealth in the UK between classes. So there's still very different levels of wealth in the UK, and they are quite separated. And also, in general, we really don't want to make someone feel bad about having less money or being in a worse position. People often consider it, like when you talk about how much money you earn, that you are, almost saying like, look at me, I have this much money, like you don't, this kind of thing. I know it's different in every culture, but in the UK, this topic is kind of treated like that. It's like how in some other cultures you wouldn't talk about politics in public. We also don't talk about money in that way. But we love to talk about politics. That's always a great topic in the UK. And a quick one I would add at the end of this podcast is don't forget that we drive on the other side of the road, so on the left side. And also this applies to usually pavements and other areas. So if in buildings, people tend to walk on the left side because they're used to it from cars as well. For example, in my school, in the corridors, everyone had to walk on the left side of the road, or on the left side of the hall, not the road. And yeah, it can be a bit confusing because so few countries do this in the world. Don't ask me why. We do things weirdly sometimes in the UK. But yeah, that's all the points for today. I hope it was interesting. I hope there were some new points for you, or at least I explained some of these points a little bit more for you. I hope each and every one of you will get to visit the UK someday or sometime. And if you have, let me know what you thought. Do you agree with the points that this author or writer wrote in this article? Let me know. You can message me on Instagram or contact me through email or any other way as well. So thank you all so much for listening. I hope you have a really great day, morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever time you're listening to this. I'll see you all in the next episode. Goodbye. Did you know over 2 billion people speak English? I'm Oliver, and welcome back to the Easy English podcast. I'm glad you're one of those 2 billion. Today, we are going to be looking at a very useful topic. and that is how to learn English through YouTube. More specifically, how to learn to speak English. So this is one of the best and easiest tools for learning English. It's completely free, and that is YouTube, of course. Just by watching YouTube videos, there are some great ways to learn English. So today, I'm going to share some tips about how to make the most of YouTube for learning English. I'll recommend you some other great channels as well, and I'll give you some extra bonus tips on how to use it effectively. Let's get started. So first off, very quickly, why is YouTube great for learning English? There are so many reasons. And of course, you're listening to this video right now in easy English for language learners. And that shows the variety of content on YouTube. You can find videos on almost any topic. Cooking, travel, movies, music, and of course, even English lessons or English listening practice. And that's what's so amazing about YouTube, is you can find videos on anything that you are interested in. And because over 2 billion people speak English, there is so much content, so many videos to choose from. One of the hardest parts of language learning is sometimes staying interested and motivated. But with YouTube, you can watch and consume content in English about topics that you are interested in. Okay, let's go to point 2. But first, if you're enjoying this video, like the video. Okay, point 2. Different accents and styles. So you can listen to people speaking English from all over the world on YouTube. You can listen to American English, British English, Canadian English, Australian English, and even non-native speakers speaking English from different countries too. It is by far, in my opinion, the best place to practice real accents and speaking styles. So when you watch movies and TV shows, quite often they are either standard American English, so a standard American accent, or a standard British accent. But there are so many different regional accents within each country and all around the world. So often people, when they go to English-speaking countries for the first time, are quite surprised that people sound very different, and it can be quite hard to understand them. So with YouTube, you can practice listening and understanding these accents. Okay, the third point is control how you learn. You can pause, rewind, and even slow down the video if it's too fast. That's amazing. And so many videos have subtitles that can help you to understand. Like this one, for example. I have built-in subtitles to the video where you can read along and see any words that are difficult or hard to understand. So that brings me on to my first tip. If you are like a beginner or lower intermediate levels, you should watch English videos with subtitles. And many of them on YouTube do have subtitles. So first, find videos with subtitles and watch them. Then try watching the same videos again without subtitles. And this will help you to practice and improve your listening skills as well as your reading skills when you use the subtitles. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning, choose videos that you enjoy. So the easy way to find these are to put English before what you want to find. For example, you could do English cooking recipes if you like cooking. And that way you will definitely get English videos. Or you can simply search in English cooking recipes because YouTube will give you English videos because you have searched in English. When you watch these videos, one great thing that you can do is imitate what you hear. Imitate means to copy and repeat. So you want to listen to what the speaker is saying, focus on their pronunciation, the tone, and the rhythm of their speech, and then copy it. Pause the video and repeat back what you're hearing. This is a great way to copy and practice accents and pronunciation from YouTube. And you can even do it with my podcast episodes. Okay, the next point to get the most out of learning English from YouTube is to make notes. Don't just watch videos. I mean, that's great. You can do that sometimes to relax and do some relaxed learning, but you should also make notes. So when you hear a word that you didn't know, write that word down, put it in your flip cards, for example, and try to remember it later. You can even write down the whole sentence that the word was in. And this is because the context of how that word was used can be very helpful to remember and learn it. Okay, so my final tip is to do short but frequent practice. And what I mean by that is to try watching short videos every day. Like, for example, this channel. So these short podcast episodes. And this is much better, in my opinion, than watching one long video per week. So it's so much better doing short little bits every day than one long bit once per week. It's having that routine and that continuous gradual progress every day is so much more important. Even 10 minutes per day of YouTube in English, for example, one of these episodes, will make a difference long term and really help you with vocabulary, with listening, and even with speech. There are other channels that I recommend as well as this one. Of course, I think this channel is great for you. Do subscribe if you're new. But there are other resources such as BBC Learning English, which I think is great. I'd also recommend watching things such as TED Talks. There are a lot of TED Talks which are given by native speakers and non-native speakers too. Okay, so now that we've talked about some tips, we've talked about some recommended channels, what are some problems that people often have when they try to learn English for YouTube? One problem is just watching the videos without practicing. So watching the videos and listening is great, that's fantastic, but remember it's good to practice, to listen, and to write as well. And then review. Let's take, for example, if you listen to this podcast episode or another one of my videos. You can listen and watch it through one time without maybe reading subtitles, without writing or pausing, and then re-watch and listen again, focusing on key parts or aspects. Or you can do it the other way around. The first time you watch, You can pause, read all of the words that you don't know, and then at the very end, re-listen without pausing and see and notice the improvement the second time. You will understand so much more. Another problem some people have is not picking videos that are suitable for them. And what I mean is they choose videos that are too difficult. For example, with very fast speech or very strong accents. So do start with easier videos and easier podcast episodes, and then you can start watching like native speaker normal content. So just be consistent, do a little bit of practice every day, and try to follow these tips. And you too can learn English through YouTube. Thank you for watching or listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to support me, there is a Patreon link below with bonus episodes every week. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. I am so excited for today's podcast because it is on a very interesting topic for me and hopefully for you. That topic is tea. Tea. We all know that there is a huge stereotype about tea in the UK. British people love tea. And this stereotype, in my opinion, is very, 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 very true. Firstly, I really hope that everything is well with you and that you're having a wonderful day, no matter where or when you're listening to this podcast. I really appreciate your support and just you for listening. So today we are going to be stepping back in history to a time where the British were all around the world. The British Empire, the total area of the UK, spread across the world. This was the time when tea, as we know it today, the idea of black tea or tea with milk was really born, and the popularity was spread. It moved across the world. Of course, tea has existed for thousands of years. It has been popular in China, India, and various other countries. But it was during this time in the British Empire that tea became worldwide, that the popularity of tea increased. So, of course, as you may know, tea can't actually grow in the UK. The climate, the weather is just not warm enough. It has never grown here. So how did they get it? How did tea arrive here? Well, as many of you might already know, there was a huge company called the East India Company, or the East India Trading Company. This was a large organization, a large company in Great Britain. They traded all around the world. Traded means they moved products and sold them. So they took items from one country and took them to another to sell them, making money. They traded all sorts of items from tea to coffee, spices, and even something called opium, which is a drug. At one point in history, this company actually made up, it accounted for over half of the world's trade. This is crazy. Imagine that. One company had half of the world's trade. However, they definitely weren't all good. In fact, these were the same people who invaded India. They made it a colony, a part of the British Empire. and they did a lot of awful, terrible things. And they did all of this for money and wealth. They even traded and used slaves. Of course, this was a completely different time. But today we will be focusing on tea, not slavery or the invasion of India. So this company, the East India Company, was the first to bring tea to the UK. In the UK, there were already coffee houses. So almost like cafes, like Starbucks, I guess. They sold very many different types of coffee. The first record of tea being sold was in 1657 by a man named Thomas Garway. He sold tea leaves and also liquid tea to the public in his coffee house. He actually claimed that tea made you lose weight and that it made your body very active and healthy, and it kept you healthy until old age. Of course, he had no proof of this, and he just wanted to sell tea. After tea first appeared, it quickly gained popularity across all of the coffee houses, across all of the cafes, I guess. And by the year 1700, over 500 coffee houses sold tea. However, it wasn't all fun and games. This was very bad news for all of the owners of pubs and taverns, so bars as you would call them, because tea had now become the favourite drink of the population, especially the working class population, those who worked in factories and other lower paid jobs. They were now buying a lot less alcohol and drinking more tea. At the same time, this was also a big problem for the British government. Why, you may ask? Because they made so much money off of taxes on alcohol. So a tax is a fee, an extra bit of money that you have to pay the government. Since less people were drinking alcohol, the government made less money off of the taxes from alcohol. You can probably guess what they decided to do. Charles II, who was the current King of England, decided, I have a really good idea. How about I tax tea? I add a fee, an extra price to tea. It got so crazy that they increased the tax on tea to 119%. This made tea extremely expensive. It was ridiculous. So naturally, what happened next was a new illegal trade of tea, almost like drugs. Many ambitious individuals decided to take tea and smuggle it into the country. Smuggle means to bring it into the country illegally without getting caught. They used to hide it in different places, and apparently one of the most popular places to hide tea was in churches. Of course, eventually into the future, the taxes were reduced and tea consumption became much more normal. So people didn't have to pay extreme prices. That is the basic history of tea in the UK. It is worth noting that whenever I say tea, I mean black tea. But there are still other areas of this traditional drink that we can still talk about and understand. One of these is, why do British people drink tea with milk? Some people find this idea disgusting or just not nice. Why milk? The reason for this is actually quite surprising. I didn't even know until I researched it, until I looked up about it for this podcast. During this time period, people used to drink tea from china cups. These are very delicate, they're very thin, and they can break easily. The problem was that when you poured hot tea, so hot water, into these cups, it would cause them to crack. It would cause them to break from the heat. So people added cold milk into the bottom of the cup first. Then they added tea, and then they added the hot water. This allowed the temperature to be cool enough so that the cups wouldn't break. And of course, over time, people got used to the taste, only drank tea with milk. So in fact, the history of tea with milk in the UK is nothing to do with taste. But of course, now it is, because it is so heavily in British culture and such a tradition that people prefer milk with tea. They simply like the taste now. And now people often argue about whether to put the milk in the cup first or the milk at the end, so after you've added the tea and the water. I personally add the milk first. If you drink tea with milk, I would be interested to hear which you add first, the milk or the tea. Finally, it's worth mentioning that there are now many different types of tea in the UK, but people still prefer black tea on average. It is still the most popular hot drink by far. When I first went to Russia, my girlfriend there showed me many different types of tea, and honestly, I was quite surprised, because all of my life I had practically just drank tea with milk, black tea with milk. I tried black tea with lemon and various other types of tea and flavours, and honestly, I really enjoyed them. But every time I come home, or even when I was living in Russia, I usually return to black tea with milk. It reminds me of home, and it's a very soothing, calming drink for me. That's everything for my talk about tea. I hope it was interesting for you and that you learnt something new. And most of all, you got to practice listening in English.